Recently I felt bored and wanted to try playing something different, a game I hadn't played in over 8 years. Batman Arkham Asylum. And yes, as you could guess from the title, it has now been out for 12 years. Which honestly just makes me feel ancient. But regardless, I booted up the PS3 and gave it a play. Now, because I hadn't played it in such a long time, and because my memory is actual garbage, I only remembered very distinct parts of this game. And even then, a lot of it felt like it played out differently in my head. So this almost felt like I was playing it for the first time again. Which was great, since that's what anyone would want when playing a game this good. So the game starts with Batman taking Joker to Arkham Asylum. Who would have guessed? And after having a feeling he's up to something, follows him in. Then of course Joker gets free and causes mayhem, creating the premise for the rest of the game. Now, first thing I need to say is having the game be set in Arkham Asylum was the best idea ever, as not only does it give the creators a vast variation of enemies and an interesting story, but also is perfect for the first Batman game. It saves the creators the hassle of making an open world without taking away the depth of one, since they can focus sheerly on adding detail to a smaller game world. Also, since it's the first game in the series, they should focus more on the characters and story anyway, since their budget and resources would be drastically smaller for their first project. Whether it was an intentional move or it's just what they were limited to doing budget or technology wise, it still helped the game age very well over time. See, with a game like this, I don't even know where to start, since nearly all of it is almost perfect. From the satisfying free-flowing combat to the stellar voice acting of Mark Hamill.
Hey, Sharpie. Love what you've done with the place.
Yo, Frankie, how's the wife and kids? You miss me?
Shut it, clown!
And Kevin Conroy.
There's no escape, Joker.
And even the music is incredible. There's just not much wrong with this game. That being said, it's not a perfect game. A lot of the boss fights were done very well, much better than some Arkham games, that's for sure. Arkham Knight, for example, the Scarecrow segments were exceptional. Since the platforming in this game is already pretty solid, then add all this crazy shit.
Father, you should have stood up to him, son. Mom?
Help us, Bruce!
Fight skeletons, play a twisted cutscene where the Joker and Batman are reversed, and of course, the infamous fake glitch. This shit was awesome, and had to be some of the best parts of the game for me. Now when you go from that to this, it's a pretty drastic change. Now the Killer Croc part wasn't terrible, it had its good moments. There were parts where I did get caught off guard a bit, and the last chase at the end was pretty cool. But overall, this part of the game was definitely the weakest for me. It just felt too easy to stop Croc. Just hit him with a batarang and move on until he appears again. Except 9 times out of 10, you can predict where he's going to appear before he does, making the whole experience way too easy and a bit boring. Not to mention you can't run while going through the section, which just slows down the entire momentum of the game, just to collect some plant pod samples. The last chase at the very end was pretty cool, even though Batman looked suicidal at first, but overall I just wasn't a fan and felt like there was a lot more potential for Killer Croc in this game. The only other boss that felt pretty lackluster in this game for me was the final boss fight against Titan Joker. Now, it wasn't as slow and repetitive as the Killer Croc fight, but it felt pretty disappointing. Basically just involved avoiding Joker until he got distracted, fighting his goons, then grappling him down, rinse and repeat. There'd be moving bombs and exploding boxes while you fight the goons, which would change it up a little, but still it could have been much better. Also, the whole idea that Joker got too distracted showing off to the news helicopter instead of fighting Batman 3 times in a row and not learning from it just felt a bit cheap. It could have made for a cool level change with Joker adapting to that and Batman having to use other gadgets instead. For example, the first section could have been the Batclaw, Second part could have been using batarangs at the right time to stun him, and third could have been setting explosive gel on the ground and setting off at the right time. There's just a lot of options for something different, you know? Although the ending cutscene was still epic and set up Arkham City pretty nicely, so it wasn't all bad. One thing this game done almost perfectly though was gadgets. From the iconic explosive gel, the line launcher, the backclaw, to even the cryptographic sequencer, all of which worked very well. The cryptographic sequencer in particular was pretty satisfying to use. I just like how over time you unlock more and more gadgets that unlock many more routes for Arkham Asylum and tons more ways to fight enemies. One last thing I have to mention about this game is of course the combat. It actually blows me away that a game with combat this solid and satisfying was made 12 years ago. When this game came out, combat like this was unheard of and really paved the way for later Arkham games combat and Spider-Man's combat, which was praised for similar fighting mechanics to Arkham Asylum over 9 years later. Even Miles Morales, which came out recently on PS5, uses the core fighting mechanics that Arkham Asylum had all those years ago. If that doesn't tell you how spectacular the combat is in this game, especially for the time, nothing will. And not to mention the variation of combat techniques using gadgets. Whether you want to blow up an enemy with explosive gel, grapple one mid-fight, or even zipline into some. There's just so many ways you can fight in this game. Enemy types and environment changes also add to that. You have the electric baton enemies that require you to vault over them and attack them from behind. And there's the knife enemies that make you have to stun them before striking. The armed enemies with guns or melee weapons, which are pretty easy to take out but aren't fun to get damaged by. And then of course you've got the brutes that can be taken out by stunning them mid-sprint with batarangs or even by each other. Later on in the game it starts adding other interesting changes that help increase the difficulty a bit. First, the game adds explosive gargoyles so that every time you go to grapple onto one it blows up, exposing you and destroying a grapple point, making them only usable for emergencies. And enemies start having these collars that beep when they're taken out, making you have to strategize which enemies to target first and forcing you to move quicker and more often. All these enemy types and game mechanic changes are great. The electric and knife enemies change it up, increase the difficulty a little, making the combat even more satisfying to pull off, but also helps illustrate the different fighting moves you might not use often without them. The melee enemies don't change it up a huge amount, but the armed enemies can be very dangerous if not taken out early, so it adds a bit of challenge in that way. And the brutes are pretty good, although sometimes it feels like it draws on a little when you're fighting two at once. It also makes for some new ways to fight, so overall it's pretty cool. The exploding gargoyles aren't a massive change but didn't go unnoticed, and helps add a bit of challenge outside of combat. And the enemy collars were really good for changing up the gameplay while also adding more difficulty, which I quite liked. My conclusion on this game is that it was already a superb game in my mind, but replaying it has showed me that it's aged like fine wine. The fact that it is 12 years old and feels great to play, has an amazing story, incredible voice acting, and insane fighting mechanics speaks volumes. Batman Arkham Asylum was ahead of its time, and games of this caliber are just so rare. It really set the bar for how to make a superb superhero game even to this day. Hopefully you guys enjoyed watching. I loved replaying Arkham Asylum so much that I'm going to be streaming Arkham City and Arkham Knight for the next couple weeks on my Twitch. If you want to stop by, the link will be in the description. Subscribe for more content like this and don't forget to like if you enjoyed. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.